Hey everybody, welcome to Deployment News. I have a special guest today, Drew Clark from Broadband Breakfast. We'll be discussing all things broadband. Be right back. Stand by. Hey there. Again, thanks for joining me. Rick Yuzzi here with Z Quorum with Broadband Deployment News and my special guest, Drew Clark from Broadband Breakfast. Drew, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm well. It's been a busy day with lots of broadband events. We just did Broadband Breakfast Live online just 2 hours ago. So a lot of broadband talking today.
Yeah, you seem like you are busy all the time. I see you everywhere. So anybody who is following the broadband business and what's going on probably has run into you somewhere on a webinar or maybe even in person somewhere. So I know you're very busy with that. So
well, this is my first time on this program, Rick, and I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you. So I wanted to start with just your background because I know you've been involved in broadband a long time. I think with Broadband Breakfast since 2008 or so, and probably even prior to that. So tell me a little bit about your background and how you got into this passion for broadband deployment, adoption, those kinds of things.
No, absolutely. So I started Broadband Breakfast 15 years ago, and we actually started as Broadband Census and pivoted over to Broadband Breakfast soon thereafter. And it probably requires me to go back just a few more years before that, if that's okay, Rick.
Yeah, sure.
So I ran a program at a nonprofit journalism center called the Center for Public Integrity, and we were focused on the power of big media companies. And this was 2007, mind you, right? And so broadband was around, but it wasn't just in the consciousness. And so I basically said, you know what, looking at the power of big media is all well and good, but we also got to look at the power of big telecom, right? And I researched the issue, and I just said, you know what? And the FCC actually has a database about where broadband providers offer service. And if we could just get a copy of that database, things would be so cool. We'd be able to explore and make this open and figure out where broadband is and isn't and all that. Well, knock, knock, knock. We go to the FCC. We file a Freedom of Information Act request for this database, the Form 477, drumroll please, the Form 477 database. And, they basically, they were going to say no thanks, but they actually missed their deadline by one day. So we took them to court. We filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit against the FCC. This is under Kevin Martin, then the head of the agency in the Bush administration. And, we had a whole, long drawn out court case, and all of the broadband providers entered this dispute on the FCC side, arguing that, oh no, we can't release this information because it would make it more competitive if people could go out there and build broadband and know where we offer service. And we argued, look, you make this available on your website. You just type in your address and you could find out where you offer service. Why can't we just display it as a map, right? That was our argument. We lost the battle, but my own view is that we won the war. And the reason we won the war is because the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 put into place a provision, the Broadband Census for America Act by Senator Ed Markey, and it actually called for a census block by census block map of broadband availability by provider. So that's kind of, that's a little bit of a nod to that legislation, the Broadband Census. Soon after this lawsuit was filed, I ended up saying, you know what, we need to supplement this with crowdsourcing broadband speed. So we need to do something we called Take the Broadband Census. And we basically, put out their speed tests. We use the NDT, Network Diagnostic Tool, open source speed test. And this is kind of the origin of Broadband Census, right? So soon thereafter, I'm a media guy. I've been a journalist all my career. I'm also an attorney, but for the most part, I really see myself as a journalist bringing information, news, data, and solutions together. And what we did then was, we founded Broadband Census and it quickly added in news, and then we launched an event series over breakfast, hence the name Broadband Breakfast. So at some point we kind of split off the data with from the news and events, and Broadband Breakfast is the news and events service that's been around since 2008.
Oh, interesting. So basically, oops, excuse me, lost my earpiece here. So basically, Broadband Breakfast grew out of that. So is that, do you see that as kind of an advocate kind of website where you're advocating for broadband?
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny, Rick. I mean, I do get asked this question, and I mean, it is a fine line because, look, I mean, our tagline says, the leading, media company advocating for higher speed broadband. But I don't consider myself an advocacy, and we don't consider ourselves an advocacy organization. We are a team of journalists, reporters, and people who put on events. So, I mean, to the extent that if you want slower broadband, or you're satisfied with low quality copper connections, yeah, well, I mean, sure, okay, that's we're not going to advocate for that, right? But I mean, in terms of like the positions, the terms of net neutrality, in terms of open access, we're really trying to be very open, fair, balanced, and not take sides on particular issues.
Yeah, cool. So obviously this is an exciting time for broadband. We had, the pandemic really pointed out the need for everybody to have good quality broadband at home. And, it did expose some of those DSL, that copper kind of old network. And of course, there's lots of funds coming our way that, that have been, especially since the pandemic. So you've been involved in this a while. So what pitfalls do you see that we want to avoid? There have been programs like there was BTOP and CAF2 and RDOF. And you think we've learned our mistakes, or do you see any pitfalls coming forward? What do we need to avoid as far as mistakes?
Well, as the generals say, you're always fighting the last war, right? And so you're overcompensating, right? I mean, we basically, just kind of broad brush here, Rick. I mean, BTOP, the Broadband Technology Opportunity Program, was part of this 2009 Recovery Act. And it funded $7.2 billion for broadband. It was mostly for middle mile connections. There were a few last mile that snuck in there. It was basically for data, which is I didn't tell this part of the story, Rick. So after I started Broadband Census and Broadband Breakfast, I got recruited to go to the state of Illinois and run the state's broadband program under then Governor Pat Quinn. And so I moved me and my family out there to Springfield, the capital of the land of Lincoln. And it was a great 3.5 years running that program. It was an incredible opportunity because I was I was a state broadband leader, right, for Illinois, fifth biggest state. And, we basically were coordinating the coming in of federal money through the BTOP program. We had to collect the data from the providers, and there were many hair-raising issues with that. And we also kind of saw ourselves as being involved in broadband training and deployment. So the organization, the Partnership for Connected Illinois, or Broadband Illinois is what we called ourselves, we basically were serving this function of coordinating with information about broadband, oversight of funding, and training and advocacy. Okay, there's that word, right? Mm-hmm. We were maybe more of an advocacy organization, so to speak, than Broadband Breakfast is. But what we did at Broadband Illinois was really taking advantage of that BTOP funding. Okay, so now back to BTOP and lessons. So the BTOP funding was done by NTIA, by the National Telecommunications and Information Administration at the Commerce Department in Washington, right? And unlike programs like USDA's, the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Rural Utility Service, USDA and RUS have a team of people on the ground everywhere in rural America, right? And so they've had this kind of cycle of loans and grants that they grant to rural broadband providers, and they've got people on the ground. Well, NTIA didn't have that, right? And they were basically running the program out of Washington. So our role as state broadband agency was kind of central to that on the ground, but we weren't the ones doling out the funds, right?
Yeah.
That was Washington. So that's, I'm highlighting this, Rick, because it's a big difference between what the BTOP program was designed to do, pass funds for middle mile deployments through an NTIA process, and what the BEAD program, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, is doing, which is passing money from the feds to the states. The state broadband authorities are the boots on the ground. And by the way, NTIA has definitely ramped up that on the ground in the field type of, they now have federal program officers in all states, in all 50 states, the other territories. So BEAD from the states, last mile deployments, subject to a very elaborate process of rules that have enshrined in law, and then through the notice of funding opportunity. And so, are we going to succeed? Well, we'll see, right? In between those two, in between BTOP and BEAD, there were a couple other exercises and programs, right? And these were the CAF2, the Connect America Fund Round 2, or the RDOF, Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. And these were programs that were more kind of reverse auctions, right? We will go solicit bids by potential providers who will bid an amount, low amount. It's a reverse auction because you're, instead of the highest bidder, highest paying person getting the bid, the winner is the lowest bidding person against the government who's bidding it.
Like
and there have been a lot of
name that
criticism.
tune. Like name that tune on broadband,
well, Yeah, and so I'm basically, what I'm delineating is there's just three completely different approaches: BTOP, CAF2 and RDOF, and BEAD, right? And so, well, what have we learned? I don't know. I try to avoid just these sweeping generalizations. There's a lot of people who criticize BTOP. Oh, a lot of wasted money. I didn't see a lot of wasted money. I mean, we were quite involved in measuring and monitoring the progress of BTOP awardees in Illinois. And these were, the programs were very well run, the ones that I saw or had purview over. Now, my concern is that, we're basically setting expectations too high. We're setting expectations so high that we're going to solve the problem in this country. And if we're basically saying, yeah, but only for people who have 25 megabits down, 3 megabits up, only those people are considered unserved. And if we take the provider's word for it, i.e., a provider can claim they offer service at that level, and we're going to believe them and not provide funding. I mean, that's a problem. That's the biggest problem that I'm seeing right now, is taking the, and we're hearing all the right noises from the agencies, from the federal. Oh, we're going to crowdsource this. We're going to double check this. But the truth is that the burden of proof is on the user rather than the provider. If we could flip that burden of proof and require the provider to say why they are in fact offering service, when there are criticisms and complaints coming in from people who say, I'm not getting anywhere close to 25/3 broadband.
Yeah. And so, what is your confidence level, or how concerned are you for the next broadband map? Because, there were obviously issues with the first fabric. That was a big undertaking. And I think a lot of that's been fixed. And then there were concerns about, service providers, their inaugural upload of data onto the fabric was not correct. In some cases, they underreported because they didn't know what they were doing. What do you think about this one that's coming out in this spring, in May or so, whenever that's going to be? Do you feel confident it'll be mostly correct?
No, I don't. I don't feel confident, and the reason is the burden of proof that I've just mentioned. And look, and Rick, I'm sure you followed this too. They're not even taking data points for community anchor institutions, right? Those entities that are not not commercial businesses, but are also not residences like libraries, schools, hospitals, and so forth. They're not even that data point's not even being collected, right, as part of the broadband map. So, I mean, we could go on many problems with the rollout of the broadband map, and the fact that it's not publicly available, right, or the fact that there are criticisms. I'm not sure I believe them, but criticisms that, well, no one can use or reference a data point or a broadband serviceable location because that's part of our, intellectual property. I don't necessarily accept that claim, but some people are accepting that claim that is put out by some folks. So I mean, I basically just pushed out three criticisms that come to mind, and there are many more. So I am not optimistic that the broadband map will be, quote, fixed. It has to be an iterative process. It has to be a public process. And until we get to those points where we have, multiple iterations, we have multiple public data points, and we have the ability to, flip the burden of proof so that, a provider is going to have to justify why they say they offer service when what a user is getting is nowhere near there, then we're going to have a problematic map. Now, I'm sorry, Rick, I'm going on long, but the potential saving grace is that every state will be wrong in the same way. And if every state is wrong in the same way, then you'll still get an allocation that roughly mirrors the reality. And then the problem gets pushed from the FCC to the states. And that's really where it's going to get solved anyway. It's going to get solved by the state broadband officers rather than over at the FCC.
Yeah, it seems to me that if we have contracted CostQuest to create this fabric and we're paying for it, taxpayers are paying for it, that everybody should have access to that. I don't understand the reasoning for not, but yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, the alleged reasoning for not was that wasn't part of the deal we negotiated, right? If you wanted it to be available for everyone, then you would have had to pay more. That's the argument.
Yeah.
So yeah, the government might have saved money anyway because it's having to pay multiple times for the same product, as I understand it, and that just is crazy.
So
the FCC has to pay, the NTIA has to pay too. I mean, doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. So we're going to have, again, they're trying to stick to their date of June 30th of making the allocations based on the next map that's coming out, what they're calling their first production map. And there was a bill introduced by a couple of senators to try to delay that. So what's your thought as far as, do you think it's going to be close enough? I mean, how do you balance that of we want to get started on getting these funds allocated to the states, but how good does it need to be? Do we want to delay things 6 months like they're saying it might take?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not going to say I agree or disagree. I'm not even sure whether I tried to, when we published a story on this last week, I tried to look for the bill. I couldn't find the bill on Congress.gov. Maybe it's there, and 4 days later,
it's there, but there's no text. Yeah, I found it, but there's no text to it. Yeah,
it's not there. I don't know what it means, right? I don't know what the claims that the senators who introduced it are saying until I see the text.
Yeah. Do you think when all is said and done, once the allocations are made, and there's going to be lots of money, and I think we already know, no matter how as accurate as the map is now, I think we know which states, like Texas, for example, is probably going to get the most amount of money. We've got other states like Rhode Island that might get very little, based on the number of unserved locations they have versus, let's say, the entire country. Do you think that each state will have enough funds to cover the unserved folks they may have in their state? And so, do you think they'll ever get to all the underserved?
No, I don't. And maybe I'm going to reject the premise of the question. I mean, it's not about covering unserved folks. And the administration has been quite good in saying that we need to really prioritize the unserved along with the underserved. The 100 by 20 megabits is the underserved. But here's the deal, right? You're not going to be able to get to the unserved without passing through the underserved areas.
Good point.
And so we need to think about this holistically. We need to think about solving the entire whopping underserved and unserved problem. And no, it will not be enough money to cover both unserved and underserved. But I am some positive points. I've been ragging on one piece of this. I think that there are a lot of really great things to what we're seeing in the rules that the NTIA is putting out, and by that I mean the whole notion of the match and how we're really, and states. Okay, this is really a crucial part that hasn't been reported or talked on enough, is that states are bringing their own money to this process too, right? And so they were before the passage of IIJA in 2021, excuse me, 2021, we're not 2029 yet.
Not quite there yet.
But the states are putting their own money in it. And then private companies are bringing money as well. So there's a lot of money that is going to get unlocked by this, and as well there should be, because this is a vital role, a vital investment. And we haven't talked about technology specifically, Rick, but it's clear that we are going to have to get fiber much, much deeper into neighborhoods, communities, in order to meet the need to get high capacity broadband. And then we have to do a lot of stuff on top of that too, to make sure people, have access to it and use it and so forth. But the point is we're going to need to do a lot of infrastructure deployment or infrastructure development. That's what this is all about. It's about getting better infrastructure out there for broadband.
Yeah. And you mentioned, the challenge of the match. And as you said, I think states can use ARPA funds, for example, for matches, and they've got other things they can do. They're in-kind kinds of contributions. So that's one challenge. What else do you see, that in the NOFO, for example, there's Buy American, and there's that as maybe being a challenge. And there's just some economic challenges, supply chains. I think they're getting better, but we might see that get worse again. And we've got interest rates and inflation. I mean, what do you see that might impact the success of BEAD?
Well, these are all real problems. I mean, this is in some ways why something that seemed like a lot, the $65 billion amount that is really 42.5 for BEAD is like I don't know whether it's half of that or a third of that because of inflationary costs that have really gripped the market over the last 2 years. And maybe I don't know. Optimistically, I mean, this is where the macro matters, right? I mean, are we going to have a soft landing on our economy or not, or are we going to hit a recession, right? And whether we do or don't, we're still going to have huge interest in broadband. We're still going to have huge demand for broadband. So these are going to cut into those funds available, which is why it's so important that we have access to additional funding from states, from the private sector, et cetera. And so your specific question about, Buy America, supply chain, training. I mean, they're all there. They're all problems. Now Buy America, I mean, we're actually, we have done events. We'll continue to do events on this. We're going to be doing an event in June called the Made in America Summit, where we focus on some of the issues around Buy America, but also some of the other major projects for infrastructure, including the Inflation Reduction Act, which puts a lot of attention on energy infrastructure, and the CHIPS Act, which of course is putting a lot of attention on chip production, manufacturing in the United States. So, I mean, there's a really administration-wide focus on American-made products. Now, will we get there fast enough? Will we get there fast enough we will get there fast enough on fiber, based on what I've heard and read, because fiber cables are increasingly being made in the United States. But the the electronic equipment that go into powering fiber are simply not available in the quantities necessary for the United States. So there's going to have to be some solution to that problem. you know, within a matter of months.
Yes.
Um,
Yep. So, having been a broadband officer for Illinois, what are your thoughts as far as what are you thinking that states should be doing and hopefully are doing now to prepare themselves? You know, looking at the NOFO and everything that they've got to get done at this point, because we won't know again how much each state gets until June 30th at the soonest. What should they be doing now?
well, they're working on their plans, their
Mhm.
state broadband plans, and that's what they need to be doing. They also need to be, uh, collecting stakeholders, in meetings, in discussions, physical in-person discussions and remote discussions. They need to be consulting and double checking the maps that
Mhm.
are coming out
Yeah.
from the FCC. I mean, I think it's critical that state broadband officers be on top of the mapping game. I can't see how they're trying to do this by not having a fully scaled up process, doing what they can to access existing data, because there's a lot of data out there, right? I
Mhm.
mean, and we are in touch with a lot of them, right? I mean, and for example, Broadband.money has
Mhm.
been building out some really incredible tools that are available for state broadband officers. They are among those things that state broadband officers need to be doing to be on top of the BEAD deployment that is coming.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting. We were talking about how maybe the states will all be uh, wrong enough where it'll be a wash, but I think there are going to be those states that have really been taking this seriously and looking at the mapping where some states are leaving it up to their the people that live in the state to try to verify this map. So there may be some differences there, I think. Now, as far as
Yeah, I mean, I think.
go ahead.
Sorry, just a final point on that. I mean, I think it's critical that I mean, there are reasons to do kind of speed test campaigns, even despite just getting data, right?
Hmm.
Getting data is one point, but as someone who's done this, who's led a lot of campaigns, it also helps just build awareness and
Hmm.
build momentum and like test your speed so you can see what you're getting and you can understand what your options are and you can use those options. And we as a state broadband officer can use what we understand of those options to think through how we're going to make sure broadband gets out to these communities.
Hmm. So a lot of our audience would be internet service providers as well. So what would you recommend they be doing now? Because they could just be sitting back, but I mean those are the folks that I think should be reaching out to their broadband offices and making sure that that the broadband office knows who they are and what they can do. Any suggestions there?
Um, I mean, in some ways, it's similar to what the state broadband offices need to be doing. They need to be aware of their geographical assets. They need to be aware of as best they can their competitive landscape. There are some who are going to say there's just too much bureaucracy and paperwork involved in this process. Again, there are solutions to this problem. The most important thing is to be in touch and aware of your state broadband office and be involved with what they're doing and the efforts they're putting together. It's something I've talked about before. We've had some discussions on Broadband Breakfast Live Online on this, Rick. Basically, smaller ISPs can view this as an opportunity to grow, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can view this as an opportunity to really, leverage an infusion of funding. But in order to do that, they need to be willing to work outside the box, right? To think outside the box, think outside of your current business model, think outside of your current technologies, right? I mean, for example, wireless internet service providers should be thinking about ways that they can overbuild themselves, right? Building fiber
Mm-hmm.
on a footprint that they offer service. And as they build, fiber, you kind of use existing assets for wireless coverage. So, we're not going to get where we need to be as a country if we don't build fiber as many places as we can. And therefore, think about that. Think about how to get that kind of capacity more places, but also think about how you can use your assets, your customers, your awareness, your marketing, your goodwill in the community to build off your brand, if even as a wireless brand, to build off that and do more for higher capacity broadband in your community.
Yeah, that's so important because it seems like the broadband definition of broadband is a moving target, right? It was really low up. I think it was 10 by 1 back in 2004 or something like that, and it's just going to keep going up. So if you have fiber there, it's not that hard of a lift to increase the speeds once you've got that fiber in the ground or on a pole. So I totally agree.
Yeah,
when you get fiber
yeah,
over.
absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess the last couple of questions are based on adoption, affordability. I've always said that you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them surf, so to speak. So there's certain people that they're just you could make it affordable. You could ask them, and they just don't want wired broadband at home because they figure, well, I got my phone, I use it there, I can get online at work. There can be that number of people, but what can we do specifically, I guess, on affordability? But first off, any guesses on the future of the ACP and future funding for that? Because that's something right now that has probably got another, less than a year of life in it at this point, we think.
Well, I mean, I have not looked as much into I'm familiar with it. I know what we've reported a lot on it on Broadband Breakfast about the Affordable Connectivity Program, but the FCC and the Universal Service Administrative Company that runs the USF and now Affordable Connectivity Program has not been the most consumer friendly organization, and it is actually really hard to apply for ACP funds. Now, a lot of people are working really hard trying to make that a little bit easier, right? And maybe they'll succeed, right? But I guess what I'm saying is, we gone from, okay, we need to put a subsidy out there, this $30 a month subsidy. It's now available, now widely available. Now we get the word out about the subsidy, but are we just bringing people to a bad product? Because how easy is it to do this, right? Not very. Hopefully it'll get better. And now we're getting lots of momentum on, well, it must be continued because we're due to run out. Well, first of all, we're not getting the word out, so enough people are applying for it. But once we get those more people applying for it, we're going to run out, and we're going to run out sooner. Yeah. So I guess the point I'm getting at is, I don't want to sort of resort to a conventional wisdom here. I don't think it's necessarily clear that this is the best way to do it. Maybe, it's an important way. A lot of people talk about it, a lot of people advocate for it, but we're not going to fund it unless we change the whole model for Universal Service Fund contributions. And in order to do that, we have to change the contributions piece of it, right? And that's going to involve changing, okay, who are we taxing or putting fees or assessments on? Are we putting them on, wireless companies and VoIP companies? Which we are, right? Are we also going to put them on Netflix and Google and Meta and so forth, right? So there's lots of other questions that are getting sucked into this debate, and they need to be part of the debate. And I'm not going to say one way or the other which way it should go. I'm just saying that, it can't be a preordained conclusion that we need ACP. We need to think through the different policy levers. And I don't mean to be, callous or disregarding of the need to get. I've been advocating for. We call this a broadband census. We call this the broadband spark, right? For speeds, price, availability, reliability, competition. You need to measure not just availability, but also competition and reliability and speeds and prices. Okay, and part of the reason we've got this terribly high, for the most part, right? There are some good signs, right? Broadband has not risen as fast as inflation, which is good, but we are still seeing pretty high costs in the United States for broadband, for high capacity broadband. And I'd like to see lower costs. And the only way we get to lower costs is by having more competition. and so we need, so I would not be a fan of just shoveling money from the government. Who knows where it comes from, right? We haven't talked about that, but shoveling money to internet service providers so they can then, keep high prices, just subsidized for the low income people who get that $30 subsidy. So I'm basically just saying, okay, let's wait, let's time out, let's consider all these options, rather than kind of necessarily saying there's only one way to do this, which is to extend the Affordable Connectivity Program.
Yeah. In fact, I was looking at some numbers today because I was curious. So they've signed up 17 million now, as far as a little bit over 17 million on that program. And, it was originally funded as part of the IIJA. It was 14 billion. It's a lot of money. So if they decided to fund it again through Congress, and let's say they picked the same number, 14 billion, with 17 million signed up, it would last about 2 years. So I agree with you. I thought that it should be something that they reorganized the USF. They could put a charge on broadband bills, for example, because broadband is what it's for generally, instead of, like you said, phone lines. Or as like you said, maybe some of these edge providers, like the content providers, Google, whatnot. So yeah, I think it needs to be something that is not a tax on Americans, but that those who can afford broadband and those that are reaping the benefits of broadband, like you mentioned, some of these service providers, I think that's where it probably needs to come. I was looking today, and I think I'm going to talk about this tomorrow. I noticed that Ziply Fiber, I saw a story where they were going to be doing 10 gig fiber in some areas now, which is great. You see speeds going up, but I checked their website. Yep. And they have a 50 by 50 plan for $20. And now 50 by 50 is not bad service, and $20 not a bad price. In fact, I've been in this business since dial-up, and we were charging $19.99 for a dial-up account back then, and you can get 50 megabits per second up and down symmetrical for $20. That's not too bad. That's one solution, is if service providers provide because if you've got somebody who has a problem affording the service, but you want them to be able to participate in the broadband economy, I think with 50 by 50 they can do that. And as speeds go up for everybody in general, then that'll lift all boats, so to speak, and those lower plan speeds will go up as well.
So Rick, can I ask a question of you?
Yeah.
So you do this broadcast every day, is that right?
Every day when I can. Yeah, if I'm off for the day, I don't do it. On Tuesdays, I used to do a Tech Tuesday every day, which is just on a technical topic. But doing these every day, I can't always do that like I didn't do one yesterday. But yeah, I try to do these once every day. Yeah, if I can.
No, when we started Broadband Breakfast Live online during the pandemic, and we were doing it every day for that month, but then we said, okay, we gotta level this down to weekly, and even that is quite a busy schedule. Yeah. But I mean, it's great to be able to again bring people together. Do you have questions? Are there questions from people who have asked questions here?
I don't have any questions that have come up. I was gonna mention that. That I don't see any questions that anybody that might be watching this live, but of course this is on YouTube, and as soon as we end here, the recording will be up there. So we'll have many people that'll be watching this after.
Right. So they can't ask questions after. No, I mean this is an issue you struggle with, right? I mean, do we try to drive people to our set focus of a time, which we do, 12 noon every Wednesday Eastern time. We have questions, and people do come on from different platforms, from Zoom and Google, YouTube, and Facebook, LinkedIn, and so forth. But if there are questions, I'm certainly open to them. And let me just go ahead and put my email for those who wish to reach out to me. It's drew@breakfast.media, and you can reach me if you've got questions after this. So you watch this later. Certainly go to Broadband Breakfast. .com, where you can find out more about the programs that we offer.
Yeah, in fact,
Rick, what questions you got for me?
That's about it. I think I've covered them. But so in fact, if you are watching, you can, as Drew mentioned, his email address there. You can see on the screen, I've got their web address here, broadbandbreakfast.com. So you'll see also their information on their website and contact information up there. And if you're not subscribed, click to our channel, click our subscribe button on YouTube that you see on YouTube. Click the bell to be notified when I'm live. So you've got that information. You see our website here as well. So And if you do have a question, again, you can reach out to Drew, or feel free to leave a comment on YouTube on this video if you're watching it later. And if it's something that is for Drew, I'll forward those over to you, and you can answer those, and I can post those on our YouTube channel on this video as we do that. So,
I might just also mention, if I may, Rick, we've got some pretty interesting programs coming up in the next 3 weeks. We just did a preview of Broadband Communities in Houston. That's happening May 1 to 4. Next week, we're going to be talking about green broadband, internet, and electric and energy infrastructure. On April 26th, we're going to talk about, should AI be regulated? And then when we're at Broadband Communities, we're going to be talking about broadband in multiple dwelling units. And we've actually just rolled out information about 2 summits that we're going to be hosting, one in June and one in September. The June one is the Made in America Summit, dealing with some of these issues that we chatted about a little bit up top. And then the September one is going to be the BEAD Implementation Summit. So look for information about that on broadbandbreakfast.com. And Rick, I'm really happy to have talked to you. I'm certainly open to any additional questions you've got here before we conclude.
I think that's it. I appreciate your being a guest with me, Drew. It was great. Lots of great information and a great resource. I'm part of the community that you have there at Broadband Breakfast. I like to participate in that and get a lot of information from that as well.
Well, and certainly, please go ahead and take advantage of the resource on broadband.io. We're very active on that community as well. And let me put it at HTTPS. I don't know if the link clicks in that one, but great to be on this call. Are you going to be at any of these upcoming conferences, Rick? Broadband Communities or otherwise?
Well, I know Zcorm will be at Broadband Communities, but they don't let me out of the matrix here. So
they don't.
Not often. So I don't usually go to this because I'm doing these things every day. Now, when I'm doing them, a lot of times it's just me talking, giving my comments and commentary on a news story or something like that. So it's not a big production, but a lot of times I'm doing that. So I don't have a plan right now to go to any, but Zcorm, you'll see us at Broadband Communities. We'll be at fiber shows coming up, the Fiber Network Alliance coming up. Right now, we've got somebody over. It's not related to broadband in the U.S., but we're at a show in the Philippines. Yeah, we'll be there.
Where are you physically based?
We're based in north of Atlanta, in Alpharetta, Georgia. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
And how about you? Are you there too?
I am. That's where our office is. Since the pandemic, I've been mostly working at home. So I'm in a little town called Woodstock, which is not far from Alpharetta. So again, North Atlanta.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Georgia.
Yeah. Where are you?
Georgia.
Where are you?
Well, I'm in DC.
DC.
This is Washington DC in the background,
nice.
and I live in Great Falls, Virginia. It's so nice to be with you.
Same here.
And thank you to those who are watching now and in the future. And please feel free to reach out if you have additional questions.
Yeah, thank you, Drew, and thank you everybody who's watching, as he said, now or in the future. We appreciate it. Again, if you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button and click the bell to be notified when I'm live, because I am live almost every day for broadband deployment news, not always at the same time. So you want to know, it'll just pop up for you. So thanks, Drew, and thanks everybody, and I will see you next time. Take care.